One wrong turn. That's all it takes to completely flip what should be a routine, normal road trip on its head. I'm fairly certain most of you reading this have made the mistake. You'll be driving along, not a worry in the world beyond what you'll eat later on or where you'll stay for the night, guided by a paper map or, more commonly these days, by the GPS navigation in your car or phone. But then you'll look up and realize either the GPS routed you the wrong way or has lost reception entirely, or you lost track of which roads you've taken on a paper map. And that's when you do it. You make the fateful decision to turn one way or the other and end up in the middle of Nowheresville. Population, who the hell knows? Most of the time, it's no big deal. You'll realize you messed up, pull over, and choose to turn around. All that happens is you lose a few hours, and at worst, you'll end up reaching your destination late with a bit of a humorous story to laugh about for months and years to come. But sometimes, just sometimes, the consequences can be far more terrifying. My job requires me to travel all across the eastern United States to act as an in-person liaison for my employers. I've spent most of the last 8 years behind the wheel, driving from state to state. I developed what I always believed to be an infallible sense of direction, and due to a distrust of most modern technology, I never used any electronic form of navigation. Just give me a paper map, and I'm golden. That was what I always said. Never before had I any reason to doubt myself. After all, I had never gotten lost before. That was, until that night. I'd just finished up a meeting in Pittsburgh that evening, and after a quick supper, received word to head for New York. From the moment I hit the road, I knew it was going to be a rough night. After getting onto I-76, I found myself surrounded by slow-moving traffic due to a bad accident up ahead. By the time I was waved around the scene just outside Monroeville, the bright orange digital dash clock told me it was close to midnight. Great, and I've still got a good 200 or 300 miles to go. Not wanting to deal with any more traffic, I consulted the tattered map on the passenger seat. I'll hop on over to the 30, take that east to Breezwood, and then hop back on the 76. It'll be slightly longer, but whatever. I'd rather deal with that than this jam up. My decision made, I found the interchange and put my foot down. Thankfully, it was far less packed than the 76, and I made it to the Breezwood by 2:30. The town was tiny, according to the welcome sign, with a population of just over 1,000 people, and aside from the gas stations, all the buildings were dark as their residents soundly slept in their beds. I felt a slight pang of jealousy at the thought as I stood under the buzzing fluorescent lights, leaning against the car as I watched the numbers creep up on the display. I sighed. There are times I wish I didn't have to go all over the gaff, I muttered, using the phrase I'd learned from a pal in London. It wasn't the first time I'd felt it. I knew for a fact I couldn't do this forever, and after almost a decade, I was beginning to consider seeking a transfer to a different department. When I get back to Boston, I'll ask Hargreave if there's any openings I can jump into in the near future. The sound of a rumbling engine tore me away from my thoughts, and I looked up to see what a black muscle car pulling into the station. As it slid under the lights, I caught a glimpse of the Pontiac logo adorning the grille, as well as the GTO badge on the quarter panel. I let out a soft, low whistle. Man, that's nice. Either a 66 or 67 by the look of it. The car stopped at the pump opposite me, and what I can only describe as two greasers straight out of the 50s or 60s stepped out. They both wore black leather jackets, along with faded denim jeans and engineer boots, and their hair had been slicked back into place with what appeared to be a pound of pomade each. Almost instantly, I felt a sense of wariness fall over me. I could tell these were the kind of people that parents often warned their teenager children about growing up. The kind from the wrong side of the tracks. The driver turned in my direction as he slammed his door shut, eyes sliding over my car and lingering a few moments longer than I liked. My wariness increased. Even though my car was 36 years old, I knew the BMW logo on the hood and wheels often drew people's attention, and not always for the best reasons. I turned away from the pair, looking again at the readout on the pump. Come on, man, hurry the hell up and finish. The numbers continued to increase. I tapped my foot impatiently on the concrete. Behind me, I heard one of the men walk away, no doubt heading inside to pay. For a few more seconds, all that could be heard was the buzzing of the lights and the buzzing of insects in the grass around the station. Then, with a loud click that sounded more like a gunshot in the stillness, the pump shut off. Thank God, took freaking long enough. I pulled the nozzle from the car and replaced it in its cradle, turning back to screw the gas cap in. Flipping the fuel door closed, I stood up and cast a final look around the station, and reflexively took a step backwards. The driver was still standing exactly where he had when I'd seen him eyeballing my car earlier, only now his gaze had shifted to stare straight at me. The expression that adorned his face was intense and beyond unpleasant. It was not far off the same a cat wears when it spies a mouse darting around with no place to run. I felt a huge chill shoot up my spine, and for a split second, I swore something about his eyes changed. To this day, I couldn't explain what, but I'll never forget the sudden, bone-chilling surge of fear that rushed through my body. Even though I stand at 6 feet tall and well-built, I suddenly felt like I was 12 years old again, cornered by the school bullies in the locker room with a horrible fate in store for me. I blinked my eyes a few times, shaking my head. For a moment, the feeling remained. Then it dissipated. I risked another look up. The man was still looking at me, but the expression on his face had gone, if it had even been there to begin with. Instead, he gave me a slightly amused and perplexed look. "You okay, man?" he asked. His voice was deep, the gravelly tone in it giving him away as the 2-pack of Marlboro, a day type. I let out a deep breath, then nodded curtly at him. Yeah, I'm fine. Just a long night." I turned away, giving my head another fierce shake as I rubbed my eyes. "You were just seeing things, Michael. The combination of late night driving and the lights made you hallucinate. You didn't actually see that. Maybe you should grab a coffee or something before hitting the road again, then. Seen far too many nasty wrecks from people who fell asleep at the wheel." The words the man spoke had been similar to the ones I'd been thinking, and I swung my gaze up again. The amused expression remained, but I thought I could see a trace of concern beneath it. For a moment, there was silence between us. Then I spoke. Yeah, that might be a good idea." I turned towards the gas station, then stopped, turning back to nod more pleasantly at the man. "Thanks." He had turned away to stare at the pumps, and in response, he raised a hand over his head. Maybe I made a mistake with my first impression. I still get the feeling he's a dick, but he's not the Stephen King-like antagonist I originally thought him to be. Just goes to show you appearances can be deceiving. A few minutes later, I emerged from the store with a steaming styrofoam cup in my hands. Crossing back to my car, I opened the door and slid behind the wheel. The hot liquid immediately snapped me awake, and after a few sips, I sat it in the custom cup holder I'd rigged up on the air vent. Sliding the key into the ignition, I twisted it, and the car growled to life along with a few sharp electronic chimes. Reaching over, I snapped the radio on. Along with the coffee, music would help keep me focused. A low wave of static spilled out of the speakers, indicating I'd long since driven out of range of the station I'd listened to last. Figures. I stabbed the scan button, then settled back in my seat. After a few sharper bursts of static, the speakers filled with a loud radio stinger, followed by a man's voice. "Attention, wives. Win $5 cash this Mother's Day on WWDS May 12th. When you get the signal, call us and record your voice. If your husband or son can identify the sound of your voice when played on the air, you win. Now, on to number 28 on WWDS Fab 40. Up a notch over the past week. Roy Orbison." The opening chords and lyrics of In Dreams filled the car's interior. I let out a small chuckle and shook my head. Good song choice, but holy crap, this county must be stuck in the 60s with that kind of contest. $5 freaking dollars. Continuing to laugh softly, I put the car into drive and pulled out of the station, noting vaguely that the greasers had already left. Approaching the road back to the 30, I reached over and picked up the map, unfolding it on my lap to see where I was, and more importantly, how to rejoin the 76. My chuckles morphed into a loud groan. A large tear, one which had been hidden from me, took up a large space in the bottom of the paper, directly through the area I needed. "Oh, you have got to be kidding me." I shot a quick glance around. I had slowed to about 5 miles an hour, and though nobody else was merging back onto the road with me, I didn't want to turn around and head back to ask for directions. I hissed through slightly gritted teeth. Shit. Then I took a deep breath, forcing myself to calm down. Just relax, man. There will surely be a sign indicating when the change will be coming up. Just keep your eyes peeled for it, and you'll be golden. Nodding to myself, I pushed down on the accelerator, the V12 growling as it downshifted, and I flew out of Breezwood. Passing by a hotel and a few other gas stations, I stared intently through the windshield. The low, looming shape of what had to be a church and accompanying cemetery was approaching rapidly on my left when I spied it. It was set far off from the side of the road, almost completely obscured by tall grass and reeds, but caught in the beam of my headlights, the numbers were unmistakable, as was the arrow that angled off to the left. Yes, I whispered softly. I slowed the car, flicking on the blinker as I saw what had to be the entrance, which angled slightly up a hilly incline. Making sure that nobody was approaching in the opposite lane, I gunned the throttle and merged onto the turnpike. I found myself on a 4-lane highway, the two opposite lanes divided by a well-kept grass median. Streetlights were set along both sides in intervals of several dozen yards, the dull, orange glow of what had to be high-pressure sodium bulbs seeming to shoo the surrounding darkness away and momentarily illuminating the BMW's interior every time I flashed under one. In Dreams was ramping up to its climax, and Orbison's falsetto was calming, allowing me to relax back into the seat and stare out the windshield. After a moment, though, something clicked in my brain, and I quickly looked around. With a sense of surprise, I realized I didn't see a single other car or truck on the road. Well, it is getting on to close to 1 in the morning. Especially in a rural area like this, not many are going to be out driving. They're all in bed. The song ended, and the announcer's voice came on again. Well, folks, I hope you enjoyed that tune. As for me, I'll be signing off for the night, but for you night owls and late night travelers, stay tuned, because up next, we have the dynamic duo of Elvis and Jane, who will be discussing Pennsylvania's spookiest events and taking your calls. We'll see you tomorrow morning with the AM newscast. I let out a snort. This should be interesting, at least it'll definitely keep me awake. I picked up the cup of coffee and took another sip, sparing a glance down at the speedometer. The needle sat almost dead on at 65 miles an hour. Hopefully I made the right call and won't encounter any more accidents. Early morning Manhattan traffic is hell on earth. My attention focused back on the radio as organ music began to spill from the speakers. I couldn't help but let out another snort. It was obvious the music was meant to evoke a spooky atmosphere, but in reality, it sounded more like what you'd expect to hear in a low-budget haunted house. After a few more moments, it faded out, and what I can only describe as the sultriest women's voice I've ever heard began to speak. Hello, all you late-night listeners. To all the night owls, graveyard shift workers, wandering travelers, and of course, all the ghosts and ghouls tuning in. Welcome once again to Late Night Spooks. As always, I'm your host Jane, and I'm joined by my eternal co-host, Elvis. We're here to fill the witching hour with tales that will leave you lying in your beds, blanket tightly tucked up around your chin as you gaze around, wondering what may be staring back at you from the darkness. Now I let out a full-blown laugh. Oh my good god, this is so fucking cheesy, man. I slapped the steering wheel a few times. I already freaking love this. The man Elvis cut in. That's right, folks. We're here to tell you tales that will send shivers straight up your spine and make you wonder just how real the supernatural truly is. And of course, as the show goes on, we will be taking calls from you to discuss our topic tonight. Jane, you want to tell that what that is? The woman spoke up again. Absolutely, Elvis. Tonight, we are going to be focusing in depth on some of the most unexplainable, eeriest disappearances of people in Pennsylvania. We have cases to share with you, ranging from long ago to, well, shall we say recent memory. Up first, let's discuss the strange disappearance of a judge in 1930. The woman continued to speak, but my attention was pulled away as the car rounded a slight bend. Ahead of me, I saw a small, white sign sitting next to the side of the road. Single lane, keep right. Swinging my gaze farther up the road, I spied the unmistakable, gaping maw of a tunnel. Two lights set at the entrance by what had to be the air ducts illuminated lettering which spelled out the tunnel's name, Rays Hill. I lightly tapped the brakes, slowing the car to about 40 as I saw that the highway did, in fact, narrow into 2 lanes. Inside, I could see the tunnel was lit up by dozens more lights. I felt a slight sense of discomfort well up inside me. I always had a small case of claustrophobia whenever I had to travel through any tunnels, whether they went underground, or in some cases, underwater. Watching films like Daylight as a kid really didn't help. It's fine, man. Just drive through it and you'll be fine. I took a deep breath, then with a loud exhale, I stepped back on the gas and entered the tunnel. As I slid inside the concrete behemoth, the woman's voice faded, replaced instead with the soft hiss of static. I caught a tiny snippet of what she was saying. "Elvis, would you provide us with some backstow?" I groaned. "Oh, what? Come on, man." Just when it was getting interesting, I hit the button to raise the power antenna in a vain attempt to regain the signal, but it was no use. There was too much ground and concrete in the way to get reception. Of fucking course, sighing, I turned down the volume but did not shut the radio off completely. Once I made it out the other side, I wanted to pick up the show immediately. With nothing else to occupy my concentration, I focused fully ahead on the road. It was just wide enough for 2 cars to pass by each other, though I wouldn't have been surprised if many a side mirror had met their end in here. I'm glad there's no 18-wheelers coming the opposite way. That would be a nerve-wracking experience in itself. I let out a soft chuckle at the thought, but the truth was, the silence that had filled the car's interior with the absence of the radio was beginning to become uncomfortable. Wanting to have some form of auto-stimulation, I hit the button to lower the driver's window. The sound of the tires humming along the pavement immediately met my ears, along with the soft hum of the exhaust as they bounced off the walls and ceiling. It relaxed me somewhat, and I felt the tension slowly ease away. A yawn escaped my lips, and I blinked my eyes at the sudden sense of fatigue that settled in its place. Coffee. I leaned over and picked up the cup, sparing one quick glance ahead before tilting my head back and taking a large gulp of the rapidly cooling drink. I returned my eyes to the road, and almost spit the coffee that remained in my mouth over the windshield. Sitting directly in the middle of the road was what appeared to be a man and a woman. They both straddled bicycles with handlebar-mounted lights, their gaze fixated as they stared around and aimed flashlights at the ceiling. Fuck me. I slammed both my feet on the brake pedal, dropping the cup and snatching for the emergency brake. The tunnel was filled with the sound of screeching tires as I yanked, the rear wheels locking up and the car beginning to slide sideways. Shit, I screamed, trying desperately to pull the wheel back straight and laying on the horn. For a split second, I saw the couple snap their heads in my direction as they involuntarily aimed their flashlights through the windshield, blinding me for a moment. Their faces filled with shock and horror, and they attempted to leap off their bikes and out of the way. I jammed my eyes shut, not wanting to see them reduced to roadkill, but kept my hands tight on the wheel as I felt the car begin to slow. A moment later, it skidded to a halt, rocking slightly on its suspension. For a few moments, the sound of my tires continued to echo in the confined space, and then it died away, replaced with an eerie silence. My heart pounded in my chest, and I felt my breathing coming in short and shallow. Thoughts raced through my mind with all the speed of a Le Mans race car. Oh fuck, oh fuck. I'm going to jail, man. I am going to jail, and I'm going to lose my license and my job, on top of the fact I probably just killed 2 people. Every fiber of my being screamed at me not to open my eyes, but I knew I eventually had to. Bracing myself for the scene that would be there, I forced my eyes open. There was nobody there. No bicycles lay spilled and dented in front of my car. No bloodstains covered the hood and windshield. No crumpled forms lay in the beam of my headlights. For a moment, I simply stood there, shock numbing me as my eyes darted around. What? Confusion joined the shock, and I stabbed at the seatbelt release, yanking on the handle and practically kicking the door open. Leaping out onto the pavement, I gripped the top of the door as I peered over the hood. The road was empty. I spun around, looking behind me. 2 long black marks which had been the rubber of my tires stretched away from me, back about 80 feet or so. Aside from that though, there was nothing. No sign of any other living being. That's freaking impossible. I know I saw them there. I saw them look at me as if they hadn't seen or heard me approaching. They should be here, either screaming at me or they should be here. What the hell is going on? A sudden, sharp chill shot up my spine, and on reflex, I shot a look behind me. A few hundred feet ahead, I could see the end of the tunnel and the darkness beyond. The soft sound of crickets chirping, punctuated by the sudden call of some nocturnal bird, echoed down to me. Far from bringing me any sort of comfort though, it made the sense of eeriness and paranoia which had suddenly fallen over me increase. I felt like a character in one of the books I loved to read as a kid, suddenly knee-deep in something he couldn't understand or comprehend. "Calm down, Michael, calm down," I muttered to myself. As I stood there, still holding on to the top of the door, a new sound reached my ears, back the way I'd come. For a moment, I was unable to place it. Then my mind connected the dots as I heard the rumble of an engine in the distance. A car. There's another car approaching the tunnel. Shooting a final glance around the tunnel, I quickly dropped back into the driver's seat and swung the door shut. Sliding my seatbelt back on, I lowered the emergency brake and put the car back in drive. A moment later, and I was shooting out the exit into the night. Trying to calm myself, I reached up and hit the button for the sunroof, the panel pulling back and allowing more cool air into the car. As I settled back, I suddenly became aware that the radio had picked up the station again. The static had been replaced by the woman's voice, almost inaudible over the rushing wind. Wanting to distract myself, I reached over and turned up the volume. "Well, thank you for your insights on that, Mrs. Clemens. That was truly a treat to discuss the case with you. Thanks for the call." Coming up after the break though, we're going to discuss one of the stranger, more recent cases we've heard about, so stay tuned. A commercial for a local amusement park began, and I tuned it out, vaguely aware of the amplified sound of the distant car behind me as it entered the tunnel. There was something that had been incessantly repeating over and over in my mind since I'd stepped out of the car. It kept flapping around like the loose end of a film reel in my head. I shook my head. "Knock it off, Mike. That's beyond insane. You were panicking and your mind overloaded. Even if you just came across some unexplainable and terrifying, that's still ridiculous." But it continued to gnaw at me. The image danced behind my eyelids when I blinked. Something I'd seen when the two had aimed their flashlights at me, blinding me. Just for a second, I thought I'd seen the tunnel. I slapped the steering wheel hard. "Knock it off. You didn't see shit." The irritation temporarily consumed the mental freakout happening in my head, and I looked out ahead of me. The turnpike had returned to 4 lanes, and I allowed my foot to press a little harder down on the accelerator, seeing the speedometer rise to 70. Breathing deeply, I felt myself begin to relax a little. Outside of the tunnel in the open air, everything had rapidly begun to seem like a hallucination brought about by fatigue. I began to mentally chide myself. If they'd been real, you would be on the chopping block for involuntary manslaughter right now. Let this be a lesson to you. No matter what, if you're tired, pull over and rent a motel room. Better to have Hargrave chew you out than kill someone. The commercial ended, and the sound of the Jane's voice returned, drawing my attention as I shot under an overpass of some sort. Welcome back, listeners. I hope you enjoyed hearing about Hanson's. Remember to get your butts up to Harvey's Lake next weekend to take advantage of their 2-for-1 deal. Trust me, the Speedhound is more of a scream with a friend. Now, let's move on. Elvis, you want to introduce our next case? The man spoke up. It'd be my pleasure to, Jane. Now, listeners, you know we love a truly spooky unsolved mystery here on our show. We've already covered some tonight, but this next one is one that boggles my mind for sure. We're going to discuss the disappearance of a man out near Breezwood. I took my eyes off of the road for a second to glance down at the radio, letting out a strained chuckle. Oh boy, after what I just went through, hearing about something so close to where I'm at is gonna be freaking lovely. I ran a hand through my hair, then I laughed a little more genuinely. Wonder if it'll be about any missing cyclists. The dark humor helped me relax further, and I reached down and flipped on the heated seat. A sudden bright stab of light reflected in my rearview mirror, and I cast a glance in my side mirror. A pair of headlights had appeared about a half a mile back, what must have been the car I'd heard in the tunnel. Feeling comforted by the sudden appearance of another person, I returned my attention to the show. Now, folks, listener discretion is advised because this is truly one hair-raising case. It begins at a gas station just off Route 30 in Breezwood. The time, very close to right now actually. According to authorities, the man showed up on surveillance footage pulling into the station and purchasing gas and a cup of coffee. The cashier stated that he seemed tired and a little frazzled. He stayed in the station for about 15 minutes before slowly pulling back out onto the road and out of sight. At the man's words, a huge chill ran up my spine, causing me to shiver. Ugh. Jesus, this is quite literally hitting a little too close to home. I mean, I know that thousands of people do the exact same thing every day, even at gas stations like around here, but the similarity is eerie as hell. Off to my left, I saw the forest pull away, revealing what looked to be the darkened shape of a lake in the distance. The sight reminded me of better days of being a child and going for a swim in Walden Pond, watching my parents waving to me from the shore. Jane spoke up. That's correct. Now, there are a few things that bother me about this case. The first is, after he left, he just seemed to drop off the face of the earth completely. Nobody recalls seeing him driving down the road after he left that night, and he never hopped onto the highway either. The second is that according to the police, a second car was seen pulling in shortly after him and also getting gas. Let me just check my notes here. It says it was some sort of muscle car. My eyes widened, and I felt the blood drain from my face. It felt as though I'd been hit by a truck, and a heavy pit had formed in my stomach. The paranoia and terror I'd felt back in the tunnel returned, but this time for a much different reason. Wait, a muscle car? That's what those— oh God, I spoke aloud. Please, for the love of God, don't say it was a Pontiac. Please, anything else? My prayers were not answered by Elvis's next words. I see here according to my own notes that the cashier claims it was a Pontiac of some sort. Either a mid-60s Le Mans or GTO. The lump that had settled into my stomach rose into my throat, and for a moment I thought I was going to be ill. The fact I had seen less than half an hour ago a car identical to the one being described in a missing persons case was not just fear-inducing, it was downright horrifying. I remembered catching the look the driver had given me, remembered feeling as though I were staring at a predator. I might have locked eyes with a fucking murderer. As Jane began to speak again, I quickly flashed a look in the rearview mirror. The car behind me had closed the distance, showing whoever it was, they had the pedal to the metal. It was still too far away for me to see anything beyond the headlights, though. I again focused my attention on the show as the woman continued to speak. And don't forget that the cashier also mentioned how the man seemed more than a little disturbed by the two men in the Pontiac. He even said he felt something was off about them himself. According to him, the men were dressed in matching leather jackets, jeans, and boots. Both appeared to be in their early to mid-20s as well. I was doing my best not to panic, but with each word the hosts were saying, my fear was compounding. Any doubt I'd been face to face with the same men had vanished with Jane's last words. A sudden, sharp stab of clarity broke through my mind. I've got to call the cops. Reaching down, I fumbled for my cell phone, which had slid across the passenger seat. Snatching it up, I tapped the home button, the screen flashing to life, and let out a massive groan. No bars were displayed in the upper right corner. Fucking dead zone. I hissed, throwing it back onto the seat. I pushed down harder on the accelerator, watching as the needle began to flirt with 80. I began to mutter to myself, okay, calm, Michael, calm. You don't need to panic and get yourself into an accident. Just get yourself out of the dead zone, and then call the police. Tell them you saw them back in that town and what gas station you were at. They'll be able to get the camera footage and nail these fuckers. I took several deep breaths, then focused back on the road. Elvis had started to speak up again when the BMW jolted forward sharply. My head snapped forward, and I felt a sudden ache in my neck from the whiplash as it slammed back into the headrest. What the shit? My eyes flickered to the rearview mirror, and almost screamed at the sight that greeted me. The car that had been far behind me had caught up to me somehow. It sat right on my ass, the headlights lighting up the interior as though it were suddenly daytime. The source of the jolt was immediately clear. They had driven straight into the back of me. That fact was terrifying enough, but it was the sight of the Pontiac emblem in the mirror that caused my heart to almost stop. I snapped my gaze to the side mirror and felt another surge of terror as I saw the face of the man from the gas station behind the wheel. The expression adorning his face froze my blood in my veins, as did the shark-like smile he wore. For a split second, it almost felt as though I were unable to look away from him. Then the car leapt forward, with a roar again, bumping into me and causing my car to lurch forward again. "Fuck me," I shouted, the trance broken as I slammed the accelerator to the floor. For a moment, there was no response, and then the car downshifted, the V12 changing from a growl to a roar as the accelerator began to rapidly climb. To my relief, the car began to create some distance with the Pontiac, and I caught sight of the passenger finally. He wore an equally vile grin as his buddy, and he seemed to be gesturing for him to get after me. Not today, motherfucker, I thought. I kept my foot down hard, seeing the speedometer climb to 95 miles an hour. The wind from the open window and sunroof tore at my face, and I took one hand off the wheel for a split second to stab the buttons to close them. A second later, and the world outside became muted by the double-paned glass. I returned my gaze to the road, occasionally sparing glances in the rear view. The muscle car appeared to falter for a moment, then I saw it begin to close the distance again. Shit, I'd hoped I'd be able to keep the gap between us, or even widen it, but the two must have clearly souped the GTO up because it was managing to keep up just fine. I shot a glance down at the speedometer again. I felt my heart flutter as I saw I was now doing over 110 miles an hour. As I looked back up, I heard the muffled roar of the car behind me. A third jolt, this time a little less severe, rocked the car on its suspension. I felt the back end step out slightly, and horrific images of sliding off the road to slam into a tree or rolling flashed in my mind. God, please let me survive this. Please let me escape these fuckheads in one piece. A flash of white suddenly captured my attention, and I looked up to see a sign zooming towards me. It flashed by a moment later, but I'd been able to see what it had said. Sidling Hill Tunnel, 3 miles. My grip on the steering wheel tightened. If I make one mistake in there at these speeds, I'm dead. I need to keep absolutely focused and remember all the lessons from those defensive driving classes Dad forced me to take. As I began to try and formulate a plan that would help me survive until I reached civilization, I suddenly became aware that the radio was still on. Elvis's voice spilled from my speakers, oblivious to the horror that was repeating itself mere miles from his broadcast station. "Oh, Jane, before we begin to take any calls about this case, we almost forgot to mention the man's name and what kind of car he was driving." Realizing that it would be a distraction, one that could end up being fatal to me, I spared a glance in the mirror. The Pontiac was still far enough away. I began to reach out to snap the radio off, but my fingers froze midway at the woman's words. Of course, how silly of me. According to the police reports and surveillance footage, the man was driving a dark green 1988 BMW 750AL and had Massachusetts license plates. The world seemed to slow to a crawl, as though somebody had hit a button on a VCR remote. I stared at the radio, feeling a sense of shock unlike anything I'd ever felt before wash over me. Wait, what? All these weeks later, I can still perfectly remember the horror I felt at her next words. And it says here that the man's name was Michael Goggins.